What up, everybody? It's the Both Different Podcast. It's Ricky and Sean today. It's that time of year, where there's no football on. Basketball just finished up. Um, Hockey just finished up. Baseball. Well, you have fighting sports that's year round, and golf, and some tennis tournaments, things like that. But the major like team sports. Typically, you just have baseball at this time of year. Not the biggest baseball fan, but what I will give baseball credit for is the amount of analytics they have and kind of the data that they provide. I think they're one of the pioneers in giving fans and giving teams data points that made sense to them and making the fan experience even better, like home run derbies and tracing technology and so forth. I know Sean is you've worked with some teams, interned with some teams, and you were familiar with sabermetrics and things like that. But what do you think of kind of the rise in analytics in baseball, and kind of where do you think I guess kind of give us a sabermetrics was kind of that first thing that a lot of other companies have kind of branched off from for other sports. Kind of tell us a little bit about that, or did you want to start maybe with your internship and go forward?
Yeah, I'll start talking first with sabermetrics. I think,
Okay.
it was not I think a lot of people have seen the movie Moneyball, which is kind of, one of the early,
It, it always comes back to
storylines of
Moneyball.
what?
It always comes back to Moneyball.
It does always come back to Moneyball. But yeah, so I mean, you saw though even in that movie that like it took some pretty high up decision makers taking a chance on this idea of trusting analytics and going against
Hmm.
basically everything that what the scouts were telling them. The scouts are, it's all about the eye test with the scouts. And I've been doing this way for 50 years, 75 years, like why change it? We found so many good players and um it took some big, leaps of faith by some teams, particularly the Oakland Athletics at the time, to kind of bring this analytical approach into baseball. And,
Hmm.
once they were successful with it, then other teams started hopping on board. And now, I think baseball really was kind of the pioneer as far as sports relying very heavily on analytics. I think,
Hmm.
basketball has gotten big into analytics, but they kind of followed baseball's lead. And same thing with,
Hmm.
football also kind of following in that lead. I think baseball was really one of the first major sports to have that in-depth analytics piece to it. And as far as sabermetrics, the entire premise of it is, how can we use data? How can we use these numbers that we're getting to predict, like to enhance the amount of wins that we get? So there's
Hmm.
new metrics out there. I mean, they're constantly making new metrics for baseball. I don't even know all of them myself, but one of the big metrics that people look at these days is what's called WAR, which is wins above replacement.
Hmm.
And what that is it's basically a way to measure how important a player is to your team, like incorporating their offensive statistics, their defensive statistics, and their the value of the position that they play. So if someone is in a position of very very critical value and they were to essentially go down or you were to lose them, how much of an impact is that going to have on your team from a wins perspective? That's kind of what WAR is designed to do. And I think incorporating that into other sports is something that could really have a huge impact, because you and I have talked a lot about in basketball, the goat conversation and stuff. I'm not going to get into that, but
Please
there
don't.
is no really metrics in some of these other sports yet for combining the offensive and defensive statistical metrics to create something that like quantifies both in a
Hmm.
meaningful way. And I think, from your perspective of, saying that Jordan is a GOAT, I think that's something that would significantly help Jordan's GOAT, you know, GOAT in the GOAT conversation because of his defensive prowess. So I think,
Agree.
baseball is kind of ahead of the game in that too. Um, so I think there's a lot that they're doing with analytics and sabermetrics that is very good. And, um, it's kind of been the building ground for a lot of these other sports to kind of move in that direction. I think, and which we talked about before, combat sports is one of these sports that is very behind the curve in moving towards that
Hmm.
uh, towards that way of thinking and stuff.
Yeah, it with combat sports, it's like you have like the home run is one of the coolest things to see because it's at that point in the game, and then you see how far that thing went. Same thing with combat sports is like that knockout punch, like that big moment, and there's nothing really behind it for fans to be like, damn, Francis Ngannou landed this much, and or it could be a Shevchenko maybe throws a kick, or Errol Spence throws this punch, Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury. You can't, because that was the big thing with baseball. Is like, man, Andres Galarraga hit this ball, or Barry Bonds, or Sammy Sosa. It's the furthest hit, furthest home run in this park, or oh man, he hit a 460 foot home run, and there's not that thing in combat sports. But that's where we're here. But that's another conversation for another podcast. But one of the things I think was I always loved, as a super casual baseball fan, is like speed. Like how fast is this pitcher pitching, and I mean that's one of my favorite things as the pitch comes in because like pitching, everybody wants to see the hits, but the other side of that is how hard that pitcher threw, or like just the trajectory of the ball and so forth. So you had some experience with that as far as the speed and working with a company that did some radar work with pitches, right?
Yeah, so I did an internship a few years back with a company called Flight Scope. They're
Hmm.
big into baseball radar tracking. I think they're also in golf radar
Okay.
tracking as well. Um,
Hmm.
but for baseball, they were working with a lot of collegiate teams and stuff, and using like they'd set up a radar within the home stadium of whatever team it was, and they would track every single pitch, and
Hmm.
they'd be able to tell you, and then obviously whenever the pitch was hit, they would track the hitting statistics as well. So
Mm.
um, one of the really cool things, and you were talking about speed and stuff, and I think speed is definitely a factor as far as like pure power and things like that.
Hmm.
But one of the really cool things that they were able to track was spin rate for pitchers, which is when someone throws like this curve ball or any kind of like off speed pitch, looking at
Hmm.
how fast the ball is spinning and being able to quantify that. And because of the spin, that's how you see that like movement of the ball. Um, and they could measure the spin rate so fine that like that's how a lot of scouting departments started to embrace the analytics. Was you could you know justify, oh, by looking at someone's spin rate, like this person has a curveball or a screwball or something like that,
Hmm.
that's going to be really really impactful at the professional level. Like that was a statistic that a lot of MLB teams looked at, and I'm sure they still look at today. Um, and then from the hitting side, one of the biggest things that they wanted to look at was launch angle. So,
Hmm.
because there's some people that are, you know, more powerful just naturally than others. And, swing speed is another thing that's going to, impact how hard you're hitting the ball. But the most important thing when it comes to hitting a baseball is going to be your launch angle. If you hit it
Hmm.
with a bad launch angle, you're either going to hit a ground ball or you're going to hit a
Hmm.
fly ball, and it's going to either way. Well, maybe not a ground ball isn't guaranteed to be an out, but if you hit a fly ball, that's going to be an out. And that's the difference between an out and a hit right there, and difference
Hmm.
between a fly ball and a home run is maybe 1 or 2 degrees of launch angle. So that is another really cool stat that they were able to get uh, through these radar systems and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, I mean, I thought it was really cool working with those companies, and like getting to getting to know that the data that you're working with is getting sent to like professional teams, professional scouts that are looking at some of these players from the collegiate level, um, with hopes of eventually drafting them and making them into an MLB player.
Yeah, it's funny too because well, I think you purposely wore like a baseball shirt. I just happened to be out today and I wore this hat, and it's actually funny that we're doing a baseball podcast. But I think one of the things, kind of going back to what we were saying before, is how a lot of these data focused, analytics and statistics that were for fans and so forth, how it transferred to other sports. One of the things I think about is like the um, tracking the ball. Because you saw it being done in baseball first. Then all of a sudden it's in golf, it's in hockey. You see it kind of in baseball, and you see it a little bit in tennis, maybe, even though it's more so like the more of like a not a heat map, but where the ball it's see where the ball's landing if it's out of bounds or in the court.
Yeah.
But baseball was the first to do that, right? That was like I would say that was probably after the probably what early 2000s maybe they started doing that. That's when I really was even more intrigued because I loved seeing the trajectory, the angle of the ball, and sometimes it's hard to see that ball. Even like what do you think like the Rays Stadium and that getting caught up in the lights and stuff like that. So being able to actually see it being tracked and see where it goes, and same thing in golf now. It makes it more interesting, in my opinion, as well, to actually see the tracing of the ball and seeing where exactly it went.
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember, I think baseball was definitely on the earlier end of it. I'm not sure if it was the first sport, but they were definitely one of the earlier sports to include those kinds of like flight path and trackings
Hmm.
within the broadcast, right? Because you could see
Hmm.
like what I love is watching the home run derby. Like after someone hits like 30 home runs, they'll show like basically a scatter chart, right, of like all the different paths in one
Yeah.
go and like all the different places they're hitting it. And things like that also have a significant impact from the defensive side, right? Because
Hmm.
for a while the shift I mean, the shift has been around for a long time, but it became a lot more prevalent through analytics. Because if you know that somebody is like 75% more likely to hit it to the right side, you're going to have more of your people on the right side of the field. It's just, like
Hmm.
you'd be silly not to. Um, Now, of course, this year at least, the MLB has put like a ban on the shift. So it's kind of a little bit interesting to see now teams are having to adjust or come up with creative ways so that you're able to kind of cover the field the way you want to, but
Yeah.
without doing it illegally. So that's been an interesting development this year. Is kind of they tried to get rid of the shift, but you know, and I think part of that is the fact that the MLB in general and fans, right? As much as great pitching is like impressive, the casual
Hmm.
fans want to see hits. They want to see home runs. They want to see people scoring. Like no, like that is one of my biggest gripes with something like soccer. Is I feel like
Hmm.
I don't want to watch a game where the final score could be 0-0 or 1-0. Like I like seeing games where there's lots of scoring, and baseball, can obviously have that same issue sometimes with lack of scoring, but with a lot of the things that they're doing now, they're trying to
I
make
was just
it
gonna
more
bring
friendly
that up.
to the offense, to the
Mm.
hitters. Um,
I was gonna ask you about that. Because one thing I do look at, I'm like super casual baseball fan, but I like checking out the scores and seeing the standings and stuff like that. I have Alexa on my laptop, and for some reason Alexa just popped up. I guess baseball is a trigger word for it or something else. Anyhow, but yeah, I look at the box scores, and one thing I'm noticing, and maybe I'm just not. Maybe it's just because I don't watch it often, but to me, it seems like the scores are higher this season. Like there's teams that are putting up bigger numbers now. Um, Would you say, because I know I was reading some articles about baseball, how they're trying to speed the game up, like you just said, how they're trying to make it more fan friendly. And I don't know if those different what they the changes that they made, if that helped to add like more scoring to the game.
Um, there was some discussions a couple of years back about how MLB is changing the actual baseballs that are used and
Mm,
quote unquote juicing them. Um, the
mm,
MLB, I think, has semi denied that. That they're any more likely to get hit out of the park or something like that. But one thing that we're seeing is there is an uptick in in hard hit balls, an uptick in home runs. I think we may have had an episode of the podcast where we talked about Aaron Judge last year and how he was um,
mm,
hitting home runs at a crazy crazy level.
mm,
Um, and eventually, I believe he broke the record.
yeah.
So I think when you know when you see stuff like that, it is kind of crazy, and it is kind of I do think that the speeding up of the pitchers definitely
Mm,
plays a little bit into the batter now has a little bit more control, and like the pitcher can't control the game speed as much as they could before, where they are taking a long time and like getting the batter more anxious or something like that.
mm.
I don't know if there's any actual statistics backing that up, but I do think it kind of does favor the batters more so than the pitchers, because the pitchers now have had to adjust their some pitchers who took like a really long uh,
Set up
wind
time.
up or a really long setup time now had to
Mm,
adjust because otherwise they were going to get penalized over and over and over again. So I do think that could have had an impact in some of the higher scores that you may have been seeing.
one of the things too that I noticed, and it's you see it in different sports. There's these different injuries. In basketball, it might be like an ACL or something, and in football, it's like these soft tissue injuries. Baseball is the Tommy John injuries. You know what I mean? And well, Tommy John is the surgery, but you have that injury. Was this a thing? Would you agree that this was a thing that was like had happened in seasons past, or is it like now that like I said, in basketball, it seems to be happening more often. I don't know if it was misdiagnosed back then or these soft tissue injuries are occurring more often, ACL tears in football as well. But do you think there's something now where like these guys are throwing harder, or maybe they're so many different arm angles that they're using now that that this is a more prevalent injury now in baseball?
Um, I would say a couple of things about Tommy John. I would say that the new, having some new arm angles, people coming from maybe a lower
Hmm.
release angle, stuff like that. There is some studies that have been out there that have said that long term arm health, from throwing that kind of way is not great. Um,
Yeah.
so that's part of it, and part of it too is you got to keep up. The average pitch speed probably in the 70s or 80s was a lot lower than it is now.
Yeah.
You're constantly
Hmm.
having better athletes coming through, and you're trying to get baseball has been known, similar to most of the other sports, basketball and stuff. You want to have the prototypical size players, right? The 6'4", 6'5" pitchers who can
Hmm.
use their length and stuff to get a little bit more velocity. Like they just have higher potential to reach those, faster speeds and stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure that that's necessarily causing more Tommy John injuries, but it could be a factor. One thing I would definitely say is that more players are probably getting Tommy John nowadays as a semi-preventative surgery, where they
Hmm.
have a like soreness or some inflammation, and
Hmm.
maybe it's not something that's like a fully torn elbow or something like that, but they get the surgery anyways to prevent it from getting to the point where it's a lot worse.
Hmm.
I think that's definitely probably one of the more likely causes for seeing more of those nowadays is because you do it so that you don't have to, you know, you don't have to worry about it later. And I would say that's probably one of the uh, more prevalent reasons why it's happening more. But I would
Mm-hmm.
also say that the recovery and recovery time from a Tommy John surgery has also gotten significantly better. There used to be times where a Tommy John surgery would take you out for a good 2 years. Now we've seen some
Mm-hmm.
players come back as early as 9 months to a year, and some people still have a slower recovery. It depends on how bad the injury was before the surgery. Um, but there's more incentive to get it now because of okay, I'm only going to miss a year or so, right? Because if you're a player, an athlete in the prime of their career, you don't want to be missing two plus years of your prime to get this surgery. Versus now, you might only have to miss 1 year or even less than a year potentially. That's a little bit more appealing.
What would you, because I was just thinking about it as you were talking about it and thinking back on how the NFL and NBA and even golf and probably NHL have implemented more data and analytics into their broadcasts and into, training and scouting. And would you say that baseball has fallen behind those other sports? Because what I was just thinking about as well is watching a broadcast. There's certain things I still think they're not tracking. Football obviously speed. The max speed you get of a running back. Top speed. You kind of like, oh, such and such had the top speed this week out of all the wide receivers or something like that. Is there anything like that as far as between the base running? Um, what data points do you still, as a fan watching this baseball, would you want them to that maybe they use in other sports that you would be curious to see in baseball?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I I think right now what you're missing is tracking of individuals more so than
Mm-hmm.
you know the like the radar systems that they have in place. They have them in, I'm sure, pretty much probably every MLB stadium and most D1 college stadiums. They are very good for tracking the pitches, tracking the type of pitch, tracking the a lot of the numbers regarding like within the pitches, and same thing with the hitting statistics. But
Mm-hmm.
what you aren't seeing there is like, first off, that is only happening when you're playing on that field, right? If you're on a practice field or if you're, you know, out somewhere else, then you're not getting that's those same numbers. Even pitchers who have to warm up in the bullpen, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
not tracking how many pitches they're throwing and stuff. Like the coaches might, have their own methods of
They have the little clicker
watching
thing, I
them
think.
and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
using the little pitch counter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's something that you really want to be aware of with some of these athletes is like um, load management. You want to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
they're not throwing too many pitches, that they're not overthrowing, um, and you know, um, I think that's kind of where there's still some stuff missing is from the tracking of the individual side, like
Mm-hmm.
um, especially outside of the big stadiums where they have like the radars and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've seen technology as far as some swing mechanic type stuff, and but there's really nothing for the pitcher. There's yeah, like you're right. There's nothing for the individual that you're like, you know, besides home, the basic stats, the home runs and on base and all that type of stuff. But yeah, I think there's other things that you're starting to get with other sports that baseball is still kind of lacking a little bit. Um, would you say
One
also too that? Sorry, go ahead.
one thing I will say is that baseball is one of these early sports that is really getting uh, getting ahead on what we were kind of talking about before this call, which is the AR, VR, virtual reality type stuff. There's some
For
companies out
training.
there that are
Hmm.
helping with that, and you're able to swing against. You can like there's one company that I have a friend who works for them who you can like swing and you can choose from a um, selection of pitchers, like MLB pitchers, and say like, oh, I want to take an at bat against that person, and like
Hmm.
see how you stack up. Now it's still
That's pretty cool.
yeah, and I since I'm a Marlins fan, I did that and I put it on and I took a swing against Sandy Alcantara, who was the Cy Young winner, Marlins pitcher, and yeah, no, I didn't hit the ball at all. I at one point accidentally threw the remote across the room because I didn't have it on my hand properly. But I do think that there is ways that they are getting more involved in training through different technologies that isn't
Hmm.
necessarily publicized maybe as some of the stuff that is happening in football and baseball. I think they're getting a lot more publicity for the training that they're trying to do versus baseball's kind of like we're just going to do this in the background and not really tell you so much about it.
Hmm.
But they are using some of those technologies in a way to help out with training and stuff like that, which I think is cool.
One of the things I do pay attention to, because I want to see how the U.S. is stacking up, is the World Baseball Classic. Would you say, I kind of feel like it's like basketball now, where the rest of the world is kind of catching up with our players. Obviously we have the Japanese players, the players from South America, that have always been kind of some of the best players in the league. Would you say some of these training technologies, being utilized by the team is kind of maybe helping, and maybe some of the scout like just utilization of technology and analytics has helped close the gap between the U.S. and the rest of the world as far as baseball?
I think the rest of the world has been you know producing great players for a long time. Um,
Hmm.
I do think baseball over time has kind of diminished in popularity among like
Hmm.
youth and stuff like that. I think
True.
that is a big factor to why some of these other countries are catching up because when I mean I know soccer is popular pretty much worldwide, but when you
Hmm.
go down to Cuba, Dominican Republic, some of those island countries, like baseball is like life
King.
down there. It
Hmm.
is the thing that they practice every single day, in and out. Like it is all they care about, right? And um, I think you're starting to see less and less of that in the United States, and that's
Sure.
kind of more why they're catching up. Because I think
Hmm.
technology wise, America, is a very privileged country overall, um,
Hmm.
and so we do have access to a lot of these technologies that some of these other countries, smaller countries and stuff, might not even have access to that. Um, but the passion for the game, I think, is stronger in some of those countries, and that's why they're still producing these players that they come into the league and all of a sudden like couple years in, they're lighting it up and doing things that we haven't seen in 50 years or 20 years and stuff
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's a good point. Yeah, it used to be like son and dad going out into or daughter going out into the yard and hitting putting on the gloves, throwing the ball, or hitting the baseball. Now it's, even thinking about friends with kids, it's like, hey, let's go in the back and kick the soccer ball, or having the basketball court, having the basketball hoop and shooting hoops, or even throwing the football, or more of a thing. But yeah, you drive around neighborhoods now, you don't see kids in the yard and throwing baseball with mom or dad or whatever, or their
Yeah, I
friends.
what some of my friends and I have had this discussion about, is baseball a dying sport? And I don't like that argument. I don't think it's
Mm-hmm.
necessarily dying. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that you know it it has plateaued. It's not getting more popular. But it's gotten to the point now where it's kind of where it's at, and it's going to take. I think it really would take a big influx of young talent, exciting talent to kind of motivate children to say, I want to play baseball, you know? Like
Mm-hmm.
you want those players that people look up to the way that, you know, people in football, you know, are like, wow, like Tom Brady, like I want to be Tom Brady, or, you know, in basketball, I want to be
No,
LeBron, I want to be, you know, Kobe type of thing. Like you need those players, I think, in baseball. And there hasn't been a lot of that recently. I think, you know, obviously Mike
mm-hmm.
Trout is a great player and he
And
has been a great
yeah,
player.
I agree. Yeah.
Um, but you're missing kind of a face of the sport to really like influence these kids, these young kids, and, you know, kind of get everyone back to being excited. But I do think the, you know, some of the changes that they've made with the pitch clock and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like speeding up the game a little bit, making it more exciting, making it more friendly for fans,
Mm-hmm.
will have good long-term effects with, you know, people paying more attention to baseball, more people watching baseball, and then in turn, if more people are watching it, more people may, you know, have their like not influence their kids, but like put their kids into baseball at a young age, which, you know, you can fall. That's how you fall in love with sports, is by trying them. If you don't try the sport, you're never gonna know whether you like it or not. So you know, I think that is one of the big positive things with what baseball has done recently is they're trying to get that excitement back into baseball.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. For me, watching the sport, it's out of all the major sports I've been to watch live, like that's probably the one. It's so long. Like it's and then between innings and then like the last game I went to was in Yankee Stadium, Red Sox and Yankees. You know, like always a heated rivalry. One, it was so damn hot. I was like, man, I don't. We went to me and my friend went to a. We were there at the game, spent like a ton of money just to park and everything, and then next thing you know, like it was just so hot. I'm like, dude, let's go. We went to a picnic, like a street picnic or whatever, like block picnic, and I was like, cool, man. And then we came back and found out it was like an all time classic game. You know what I mean? I was like, damn, maybe we should have stayed, but yeah, for me, it's one of the least, you know, out of all the major sports I've seen in live, it's like the most boring. So I think that plays a huge factor. It just feels like it drags and drags. And then it's one of the frustrating ones because, you know, I'm trying to, for one, tape like a UFC match or a boxing match on ESPN or something. And then you just never know. It could be women's fast pitch softball. It can be college men or women's baseball, you know, MLB. It could be little league, and the damn thing, you know, you set the DVR to watch it, and the baseball game's in like the 15th inning. I'm like, come on, man! And so like DVR doesn't get to fight at all, and that is really what annoys me. So if they speed the game up, you know, I'd probably be more apt to go to a game or even watch a game. The only time I really kind of watch it a little bit more in depth is you know the World Series or the you know the playoff chases.
I think one of the funny things that kind of hints at what you were talking about is one of my favorite parts about baseball is that the game will never end in a tie. You know, they're going to keep playing
Mm-hmm.
until one team wins and one team loses.
Mm-hmm.
I hate watching games where, you know, you're watching this game for 3 4 hours and then at the end it's just like, oh, okay, it's a tie. Sorry. Like, no. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I like the fact that there's not necessarily a time ending to it. You know, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you just got to win. What I do think has been helpful and more recently too is they added a rule where if you go into extra innings, there you start with a runner on second base. So now
I
there's
didn't know
some,
that.
yeah, they added that rule a few years back. I think they kept it. So um, you know, with the runner starting on second base, now there's a little more strategy to it. Are you,
Yeah.
with no outs, are you bunting to try to get him over to third? That way, you know, on a fly ball, he can, you know, sacrifice fly and score the runner to make sure you
Mm-hmm.
get that one run. And then if you're the home team, like if the other team doesn't score a run, that influences your, you know, are you going to try to, you know, play it safe to score the guy, or are you going to like be swinging away? Or are you going to try to steal a base? There's a lot of, increased strategy involved with, those extra innings now. And like, okay, let's make sure that we get this run, or let's like, or, if the other team scores a bunch of runs, now, like we've got to, like, we can't be wasting an out here. We got to get people on base and get more people scoring. So I do like that they've added that. I think it's kind of taken away from some of those really, like, 15, 17 inning games,
Hmm.
which can be fun. But at the same time, I totally understand where you're coming from, where it's like, you know, if you're not interested in watching baseball, then the 17 inning game is not going to be fun for you, because it's taking up airtime over something else that might be coming on or whatever.
It's killed the DVR. Like I'll be out and I'll come home. Like, okay, let me watch these. Then turn it on, and it's like baseball. Like, okay, like maybe they're gonna finish this game here pretty soon. Ninth inning, and then I'm like fast forwarding the DVR. The whole damn fight is taken up. It's like 12 innings, and the first 8 fights are like not on there. Thank God for ESPN Plus because you can go back and watch it. But yeah, back in the day when you used to have to just watch the anything that you were trying to record after a baseball match, it's just like, oh god. I would always set the DVR. Like my thing was setting the DVR like an hour and a half, 2 hours after the event is supposed to finish, so I can maybe catch part of it. Or sometimes I would have to go onto ESPN 2 and record there because sometimes if it's not live, it will go to ESPNU or ESPN 2. So that's why I was like always like, baseball's on before the fights. Oh man, because it might not be good.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the same thing too with college football. They do the basically unlimited overtimes until somebody
Sure.
wins. Um, but yeah, I mean, that I think I my dad does the same thing that you do, where you extend the recording, additional 2 hours, especially if it's on a
Yeah,
sports channel, because you
yeah,
just don't know when the game is going to end. So
that's very true. But yeah, no, this was an interesting topic. You know what I mean? I can appreciate any sport really. You know what I mean? And that's why I don't know. I love the preparation of different athletes, and like a lot of the obviously the technology because we're in a technology business, but what they use to prepare and what they use to get ready, like the fan experience, what data fans are privy to. Still, the coolest thing in the world to me is like the how many feet they hit it. I'm like, oh, for 450 feet, 460 feet. The home run derby is like one of the best events in all of all star events in all of sports. Probably the best, the most exciting, I would say. It used to be like the dunk contest in basketball, but these guys aren't doing it like they used to. But yeah, and that's what's so interesting about what we do, obviously, because we say it on every call. Like people, you bring this and show this to people, and like, oh, I could see this being used in football, basketball, baseball. And we've heard a lot about baseball too. And I think you were onto something when you mentioned some of the individual tracking metrics, some of the technique metrics. Um, we've talked about and we've gone back and forth about what we could do for baseball and baseball players. So that's I think even if I'm not a fan of it, I'm a fan of helping the sport and fan of like what we have and presenting it to them and saying and like everything else, making people the best version of themselves. And I think that's my interest in the future is going to be maybe our implementation and bringing to some of these pitchers or hitters and giving them some data points that other technologies just can't right now that we can deliver to them. So that's what's exciting for me.
I remember when I first joined, when we had like one of our first conversations,
Hmm.
that was immediately where my mind went to, was baseball. I was like, wow, like this could definitely be used, with baseball, with, tracking pitchers, making sure that they're not overusing their arm and things like that. I think that's kind of, uh, like I said earlier, kind of one of the big pieces of like thing that is missing from baseball,
Hmm.
and where I kind of want to see technology advance a little bit is that individual tracking and
Hmm.
health tracking as well. The radars can tell you a lot about
Yes.
the numbers, but it can't
Hmm.
tell you about the person. You need to know when your pitcher's feeling good or not feeling good, and listening to people I've found is always unreliable. People don't always
Hmm.
tell you how they feel. You know, sometimes you need the the technology to tell you how they're feeling. Um, and we've seen that with a couple of different use cases, not just baseball or
Hmm.
sports. Healthcare as well.
Well, I think every sport you have warriors. And fighting
Yeah,
sports is the warriors that are like, I'm not hurt. I'm just gonna keep going. That's every sport. You know what I mean? And we, even sports we've played, I'm sure there's been times where we've been hurt or I used to have really bad asthma as a kid. I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm gonna go out and still play basketball. I could have died out there on the court, but I was like, thought I was in the pros or something, man. I was like, I was getting paid. I was like, no, I'm going out there. But yeah, that's what we're like. I kind of here for also too is like that was one thing I was thinking about when you were kind of talking about something else earlier, but the biometric side of it and you know what is actually happening to these pitchers that is what is actually happening to them when they're getting these injuries, like when are their the arms fatiguing, when is it maybe you got to take this guy out, because that's the taking the pitcher out thing is a big guessing game too. Like okay, well, it looks like he's declining. I don't know. The guy could just had a bad inning, and the guy could have had a read on him. You know what I mean? And then he might come, he could you take him out, but hey, he could have came back in and threw some more heat. You just it's kind of that guessing game. So I think that's where we can play a huge part. And I know we're always using these vague terms, but when people get a look at this and we kind of explain it a little bit more, it's going to open your eyes and ears. Kind of like how when you first joined, you're like, I could see it being in baseball, because you really truly can.
yeah,
We're we can go to anything, and that's the beauty of what we're doing and why I love it so much, because it's love sports number one, love preparation, love training, love seeing people reach new heights, and that's what I feel like what I know we're doing. And I think unlike anything else, we have the ability to do it through just the user experience and the data points we're able to provide through that user experience. So excited about it. Even in the world of baseball or sports I don't watch, it could be cricket, man. Let's put these devices on people. Well, cricket's somewhat. My family's obviously from the islands, and a lot of my family's in London, so they probably especially my uncle trashed me for kind of talking bad about cricket. But yeah, I mean, we're for everybody, is what I mean. We can go anywhere. That's the beauty of what we do. So yeah,
yeah.
with that being said, Sean, I appreciate it. You gave me some stuff I didn't even know about baseball. I didn't know about the overtime, the new sitting man on second base. I think that's a cool thing. That makes for an more exciting overtime. Kind of like college football, like you said, where you have like maybe you start from the 25 and it's more about getting the score in. But yeah, no, this has been a great episode, and you know, can't wait to just we obviously have to start with our niche and kind of move out, but I'm excited to try this with everybody and see how we can help every sport and every different type of athlete, and even the casual athletes that are running and jogging or just going to the gym. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. Comment, like, subscribe. Check us out on all our platforms, all our social media, and just keep a lookout. We'll be dropping this thing at some point, and when we do, you guys are going to be really excited, as much as we're excited about it, and as much as anybody we show this is excited about it. So, thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you had a great, productive week, and we look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.